There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside a happy home. Not the silence of emptiness. Not the silence of loneliness. But the warm, settled, breathing kind of silence that only exists when you feel completely safe in your life. When you trust the walls around you. When you trust the person sleeping beside you. I used to love that silence. I used to wake up on Sunday mornings. Before the alarm, before the birds, before the whole world started making noise again, and I would just lie there, listening to nothing, feeling everything, feeling grateful I was 32 years old. I had a home I had helped build from nothing. I had a career I had worked myself to the bone to earn. I had a man I had chosen with my whole heart, and I believed, with everything inside me, that he had chosen me back. My name is Leela, and this is the story of the 2.5 years I spent smiling at a lie. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the betrayal that came later, slow and quiet like a leak behind a wall you can't see. I want to take you back to the beginning of us. Because to understand how deeply something breaks you, you have to first understand how completely it held you together. I met Ethan when I was 27. I was working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized architecture firm in the city. Long hours, tight deadlines, the kind of job that made you feel important and exhausted in equal measure. I loved it. I had always been the kind of woman who needed something to pour herself into work, purpose, forward motion. Sitting still made me anxious. Stillness to me always felt like falling behind. Ethan walked into our office on a Thursday afternoon as part of a consulting team our firm had brought in for a large commercial project. He was tall, not dramatically so, but enough. Dark hair, easy smile, the kind of confidence that didn't shout. It just stood there and waited for you to notice it. I noticed he noticed me noticing, and somehow, inside the chaos of a Thursday afternoon project meeting, surrounded by blueprints and coffee cups and colleagues on laptops, something small and significant passed between us. He asked me a question about the timeline documents. A completely ordinary, professional question. But he held eye contact just a beat longer than necessary. And I, who had not thought about a man in quite some time, who had been so deeply buried in work and ambition and forward motion, felt something slow down inside me. Just for a second. Just enough we had coffee the following week. Professional at first, questions about the project, the firm, how long I had been working there. But within 20 minutes, the conversation had drifted entirely away from work. And we were talking about cities we wanted to visit and books we had both read and the particular loneliness of being ambitious in a world that sometimes misunderstood ambition. He understood it. That was the thing. Ethan was the first man I had ever sat across from, who didn't look faintly unsettled when I talked about my goals, who didn't shift uncomfortably when I mentioned the promotion I was chasing or the savings account I was carefully building, or the 5-year plan I had mapped out for myself with quiet, deliberate focus. He leaned in. He asked follow-up questions. He matched me and I, who had spent years being told, in soft and subtle ways, that I was too much, finally felt like exactly enough. We dated for 8 months before he told me he loved me. 8 months of slow, careful, intentional building. Weekend mornings at the market. Road trips with no real destination. Cooking dinners together in his apartment kitchen. Flour on the counter. Music too loud. Laughing at nothing in particular. I had never felt so settled in my own life. I had never felt so seen when he said the words. Sitting across from me at a small restaurant. Candles on the table. Completely unnecessarily nervous for a man as composed as Ethan. I felt them land somewhere deep and permanent inside me. I said them back, and I meant every syllable. We moved in together 14 months. After we met, an apartment first to the top floor of a converted building near the edge of the city. High ceilings and old wooden floors and windows that looked out over the rooftops. It wasn't perfect. The heating was unreliable, and one of the kitchen cupboards refused to close properly, and the upstairs neighbor had a dog that apparently never slept, but it was ours. Remember the first morning we woke up there together, properly woke up, not in the chaos of moving boxes and takeaway containers, but the first real quiet Sunday morning, and I lay there in that warm, settled silence and thought, this is it. This is the life I was building toward. We were together for 2 years in that apartment before we bought the house. The house was Ethan's idea. Initially, he had started researching neighborhoods quietly, saving property listings on his phone, occasionally showing me ones he liked over dinner with this careful, measured excitement, like a man who very much wanted something but was trying not to want it too visibly in case it didn't happen. I loved him for that. For the way he wanted things quietly. I found our house on a Saturday afternoon in early spring. Ethan had a work commitment, a weekend conference, something he attended every year, so I had gone house viewing alone, armed with a list of addresses and a takeaway coffee, and entirely too much optimism. The moment I walked through the front door of the third house on my list, I knew there are houses that are just buildings. 4 walls, a roof, a collection of rooms. And then there are houses that feel like they have been waiting for you. Like they already know your name. This one was the second kind. I called Ethan from the front garden, pacing, voice too high, trying and completely failing to sound calm. You have to come and see this one. I know you have the conference, but Ethan, please just come and see it. He laughed at my barely contained excitement. He came. He walked through the front door, looked around for approximately 45 seconds, turned to me, and said quietly, "Yes, just that. Yes." We made an offer the following morning. We moved into the house on a Friday in late autumn. By Sunday evening, we had the living room arranged, the bed set up, the kitchen partly unpacked. We sat on the floor eating pizza from the box because we couldn't find the plates, surrounded by stacked moving boxes and bubble wrap, and the particular beautiful chaos of a life being relocated, and we were happy. I want to be very clear about that, because everything that comes later, all the unraveling and the discovery, and the quiet fury, it all lives inside the shadow of how genuinely, completely happy I was in that moment. This was not a relationship that had been struggling. There were no warning signs I had been ignoring, no persistent unease I had buried, no quiet voice I had been silencing. We were good. We were solid. We talked about getting married, not with urgency, but with the easy, comfortable certainty of 2 people who already knew the answer, and were simply waiting for the right moment to make it official. We had inside jokes that went back years. We had rhythms who made the coffee, who remembered to call the landlord, who always forgot to put the bins out on collection day. Small things, ordinary things dot the architecture of a real life together. And I trusted it completely, which is why, when the first crack appeared, I almost missed it. Almost. It started with small things. The kinds of things that, individually, mean absolutely nothing. The kinds of things you file away without even realizing you're filing them. Ethan had always been relaxed with his phone. Not careless, he wasn't the type to leave it lying around unnecessarily, but relaxed, unhidden. If it buzzed on the dinner table, he would glance at it without guilt. Show me the message if it was funny, roll his eyes if it was work-related, and put it face down. Somewhere around the 8-month mark, after we moved into the house, that changed. It was gradual. So gradual I couldn't have told you exactly when it shifted. But I began to notice the way you notice a change in weather before it fully arrives. A pressure in the air, something altered, that his phone was always with him now, in his pocket, turned face down on any surface. Taken to the bathroom, plugged in to charge on his side of the bed rather than the kitchen counter where we had always left our phones. Overnight. Small things, individually, meaningless, but I noticed. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had always had a tendency to overanalyze, to look for patterns in things that had none. It was one of the qualities that made me excellent at my job, and occasionally exhausting in my personal life. This inability to let a detail go, UNEXAMINED. I pushed it down. You're imagining things, I told myself. He's allowed privacy. Not everything means something. And I genuinely believed that. For a while, then came the evening in November. Ethan had gone out for what he described as a work drinks event, a monthly thing his team did, very casual, never home, particularly late. I had no reason to question it. He had been going to this thing for as long as I had known him. I had a quiet evening planned, a long bath, a book I had been meaning to finish. An early night I was in the kitchen making tea, when his laptop opened on the counter. Mid-software update pinged with a browser notification. I wasn't looking. I genuinely was not looking, but the notification was large, and the kitchen was small. And the words appeared on the screen directly in my line of sight before I could look away. Reservation confirmed, Harlow Hotel. Saturday 14th, 2 guests. I stood very still. Saturday the 14th was 11 days away, asterisk. Ethan had told me he had a 2-day industry conference that weekend. Out of town? He had mentioned it casually, weeks ago, a thing he attended periodically. Nothing unusual. I had not questioned it. I stood in my kitchen, mug in hand, hot water still running from the tap, and I stared at those words. Harlow Hotel. 2 guests. The Harlow Hotel was 40 minutes from our house. I knew it because a colleague of mine had celebrated her birthday there 2 summers ago. It was not a conference venue. It was a boutique hotel, small, expensive, beautiful. The kind of place you took someone you wanted to impress, the kind of place you did not go alone. Turned off the tap. I sat down at the kitchen table, and, for the first time since Ethan and I had built this life together, I felt something cold move through me. Not panic. Not yet. Something quieter than that. Something that felt, if I was completely honest with myself, like the very first moment of knowing. He came home at 10:30, relaxed, smiling slightly, the particular looseness of a man who has had 2 or 3 drinks and a good evening. He kissed me on the cheek. He asked how my night had been. He made himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter, talking about nothing important, a conversation someone had made at the drinks event. Something funny that happened on the way home. I watched him. I smiled at all the right moments. I said all the right things, and inside I was completely still, completely cold. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't ask about the hotel. I didn't let even the smallest flicker of what I had seen cross my face, because in the space of that one silent moment in the kitchen, I had made a decision. I was not going to be the woman who reacted. I was going to be the woman who prepared. The following morning, while Ethan was in the shower, I picked up his laptop casually, as I would any other morning, and I looked at his browser history. 11 days of carefully managed secrets, unraveled in front of me in approximately 4 minutes. The hotel booking paid for on a card. I didn't recognize the last 4 digits of email threads through a secondary account I had never seen. A name that appeared over and over again in those emails. Kara. I don't know how long I sat there. Time had become strange and elastic, and entirely unreliable. I heard the shower turn off. I closed the laptop. I placed it back exactly where it had been. I walked to the kitchen and I started making breakfast. Eggs, toast, his coffee. Exactly the way he took it. He came downstairs in a clean shirt, hair still damp, and sat at the table with the ease of a man who had absolutely no idea that his entire carefully constructed double life had just been seen. I put his plate in front of him. I sat across from him and I smiled. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," he said, picking up his fork, and we sat there together, in the warm, settled silence of what had once felt like a happy home. "And I thought you have been hiding everything from me. Now watch how well I can hide. I want to tell you about the week that followed, because it was the most quietly extraordinary week of my life. From the outside, nothing changed. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner. I laughed at things. I asked about his day and listened to the answers and gave no indication, not a single breath, not a single flicker, that anything inside me had shifted. But inside I was building. The first thing I did was contact my bank and quietly separate my personal savings into an account in my name only. I had been the one managing our household finances. Ethan trusted me completely with that, which struck me now as breathtakingly ironic. So I knew exactly what we had, what was mine, what was shared, and what I would need to move carefully. The second thing I did was call a lawyer, not dramatically, not emotionally. I made the appointment the way I would make any professional appointment, calmly, efficiently, with a clear list of questions prepared in advance. The lawyer's name was Diane. She was sharp, methodical, and did not waste a single word. I liked her immediately. The third thing I did was begin documenting everything. Not obsessively, not in a way that consumed me or darkened every moment, but carefully, consistently, dates, observations, the hotel confirmation I had photographed quickly on my phone before closing the laptop that morning. Small pieces of a picture I was slowly, quietly assembling. And the fourth thing I did. I found out who Kara was. Her full name was Kara Whitfield. She was 30 years old, a graphic designer freelance, from what I could find. She had a modest but carefully curated presence online, an Instagram full of aesthetic flat lays in city photographs and the occasional selfie that showed a pretty, dark-haired woman with an easy smile and stylish clothes. She did not look like a villain. That was the thing that struck me first, and most unsettlingly. I don't know what I had expected when I went looking something harder. Perhaps some visual evidence of wrongdoing in a person's face. But Kara Whitfield just looked like an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. An ordinary life that had apparently, for some period of time I had yet to determine, included my partner. I didn't spiral. I want to be clear about that because the temptation to spiral, to fall into the particular vortex of comparison and self-questioning and obsessive analysis that betrayal invites, was enormous. The questions were there, pressing against the inside of my chest at 3 in the morning when sleep refused to come. How long? How serious? Does he love her? Did I miss something? Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? Was any of it real? I felt every one of those questions, but I did not let them own me. Instead, I got up at 3 in the morning, made myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and I thought, because here was what I had come to understand. In the 7 days since finding that hotel booking, the thing that had settled into my bones like a quiet, clarifying cold, Ethan had made a choice. Every single day, for however long this had been happening, he had woken up in our home, looked at our life, and chosen to lie to me. Not once. Not in a moment of weakness, he had immediately confessed to. Overwhelmed with guilt, every single day. That was not a mistake. That was a decision, and a man who could make that decision, quietly and consistently, while kissing me goodbye in the morning, and asking what I wanted for dinner, and sleeping beside me at night. That man was not the man I had believed I knew, which meant that grief was not only for the relationship, it was for the version of him I had loved, because that man, the man I had chosen, the man I had built a life with, the man I had trusted completely, he had never actually existed. He was a character. Ethan had performed, beautifully, convincingly, for years, and understanding that was, strangely, the thing that set me free from the spiral, because you cannot truly lose something that was never fully real. The weekend of the hotel arrived. Ethan had packed a small bag Thursday evening, efficient, unhurried, completely at ease. He reminded me that he would be back Sunday afternoon. He reminded me not to forget the dry cleaning. He kissed me at the door. "I'll call you tonight," he said. "Travel safe." I said that. I stood at the window and watched him put the bag in the car and drive away. Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and spent the next 3 hours going through every document, financial record, and piece of evidence I had quietly assembled over the past 11 days with Diane, my lawyer, on a video call. Diane was precise and unemotional in the best possible way. She walked me through exactly where I stood legally, what the process would look like, what I needed and didn't need, what my rights were regarding the house and our shared finances. I took notes. I asked questions. I did not cry. When the call ended, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in the garden of the house Ethan and I had chosen together, and let myself feel properly, fully, without management, the grief that I had been carefully holding at arm's length for nearly 2 weeks. I cried for about 20 minutes, not for him, not even for us, exactly, for the Sunday mornings, for the flour on the kitchen counter, for the way he used to say yes to things I loved, with that quiet certainty, for the version of my life I had believed in completely. Then I dried my face, I finished my wine, and I went back inside and kept building my plan. He called that evening. As promised, I was sitting on the sofa with a book, and his name appeared on my phone screen. and I answered it on the third ring, not too fast, not too slow, casual, normal. "Hey," he said. His voice was warm, relaxed. "How's your evening?" "Quiet," I said. "Nice, actually. I've been reading." Good, a pause. I heard a door close somewhere in the background. A hotel door. I now knew. In a hotel 40 minutes from the house where I was sitting. "Get some rest. I'll be back Sunday afternoon. I'll save you some dinner," I said. He laughed. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I said. "I want to." We said goodnight. I set my phone down. I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about what Diane had said during our call, the part I hadn't written down because it had landed somewhere more permanent than a notepad. "The cleaner you handle this, Layla, the more completely it will be yours in the end. Don't react. Prepare. Evidence is useful. Composure is power. Composure is power." I had said those words to myself at least 50 times in the past 11 days. I planned to keep saying them until the day I no longer needed to. 3 weeks after the hotel weekend, I learned 2 things that changed the shape of everything. Asterisk. The first thing I learned came from Ethan's laptop, which I had by now established a quiet, careful habit of checking during the approximately 18 minutes he spent in the shower every morning. 18 minutes was more than enough time. I learned that the relationship with Kara was not new. It had been going on, in various forms, for almost 2 years. 2 years. I sat with that number for a long time. I turned it over and over in my mind like a stone. I was trying to understand the weight of 2 years meant it had started. Approximately 8 months after we moved into the house. It had existed quietly inside our life, inside our weekend trips and our shared dinners and our casual conversations about the future for 2 years. Every anniversary, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday evening, every moment I had experienced as real and ours, all of it had been simultaneously something else entirely. In a version of our life that I had never been shown. I sat very still with that information, and I felt not the sharp, sudden violence of shock, because I was past shock by now, but something deeper and more structural. The kind of feeling that isn't really a feeling at all, more like a realignment, a tectonic shift in your understanding of your own history. I had not lost 2 weeks to a lie. I had lost 2 years. The grief of that was immense. I won't minimize it. It was a grief that sat in the body, heavy in the chest, tight in the throat. Present when I woke up and still there when I went to sleep. Not dramatic. Not acute. Just there. A constant low hum of loss. But I kept going. Because I had a plan. And the plan was the thing I was holding onto. The second thing I learned came not from a screen, but from a conversation. I had a colleague at work, a woman named Priya, who moved in broader social circles than I did. She was the kind of person who knew everyone, connected everyone, remembered details about people's lives with an almost supernatural precision. We were not close friends, exactly, but we had always had a warmth between us, a mutual respect. We were having coffee in the break room one afternoon, a Wednesday, I remember, because I had a 2 o'clock meeting that I was simultaneously dreading and thinking about while trying to appear fully present. When Priya said something that changed everything, she asked me, very carefully, how Ethan was doing. Something in the way she asked it made me set down my coffee cup. "He's fine," I said. "Why?" She looked at me for a long moment, the look of a person calculating risk, the look of a person deciding whether to say something they have been holding back. "Leela," she said finally, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me honestly if I've overstepped." "Go ahead," I said. "Have things been okay between you and Ethan? Because I've heard something, and I've been going back and forth about whether to tell you for about 3 weeks, and I think you deserve to know." I looked at her steadily. I kept my voice completely even. "Tell me," I said. "What Priya told me was this. A friend of hers, someone who moved in creative industry circles, who knew Kara Whitfield socially, had mentioned, in passing, at a dinner party 2 months earlier, that Kara had recently ended things with someone she had been seeing, someone she described as being in a complicated situation, someone she had ultimately decided was never going to leave, his partner, and she had said his name, Ethan's name. Priya had not connected it. Immediately, Ethan was not an unusual name. But something had nagged at her. And eventually, carefully, she had asked a follow-up question. And the details had aligned. I listened to all of this without moving. When Priya finished, she reached across the break room table and put her hand over mine. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't know whether to say anything. I didn't want to hurt you with something that you were right to tell me," I said. And then, because I trusted her, and because I had been carrying this alone for nearly a month, I told her the truth. I told her what I knew. I told her about the hotel booking, the laptop, the 2 years, the lawyer. "The plan." She stared at me. "You've known for a month," she said slowly. "And he has no idea." "He has no idea," I confirmed. She sat back in her chair. She shook her head slowly. "Leela," she said. And there was something in her voice that was partly admiration and partly something that looked like the faintest edge of fear. "That is the most controlled thing I have ever heard. But here is what the conversation with Priya gave me that I had not had before. She told me something else. Something her friend had mentioned, almost as an aside, that Priya had nearly not repeated. Kara had ended things with Ethan approximately 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, I calculated quickly. 6 weeks ago was 2 weeks before I had found the hotel booking on his laptop. Before I had begun watching. Before I knew any of this. So Ethan had been hiding 2 things. He had been hiding the affair, and he had also been hiding from me the fact that the affair was already over. I thought about this for a very long time. He hadn't come to me when Kara ended it. He hadn't taken the ending of the affair as an opportunity to confess, to clear his conscience, to give our relationship a chance at honesty. He had simply folded it away quietly, tucked the whole thing into the same hidden place where he had kept everything else. He had been prepared to carry on indefinitely, with the lie still between us, intact and undiscovered. That was the thing that shifted something final and irreversible inside me. Not the affair itself, as devastating as it was, but the choice he had made at the moment the affair ended. The choice to say nothing. To slide back into our life like water, finding its level. To keep me in a version of my own story that was not true. That choice told me everything I needed to know about the man I was living with, and it told me everything I needed to know about what came next. I spent the following month in a state of extraordinary, strange calm. Looking back, I understand it better than I did at the time. It was the calm of a woman who has stopped hoping the situation will resolve itself, who has accepted, fully and without remaining ambiguity, what the truth is, and who has directed all of the energy that might otherwise have gone into grief and shock and desperate questioning into something focused and deliberate. I was building. I met with Diane twice more. I ensured that every financial document, every piece of property paperwork, every shared account detail was fully understood and accounted for. I spoke with my own bank. I consulted, quietly and carefully, with a financial advisor I found through a contact entirely separate from anyone in Ethan's orbit. I told 3 people, Priya, my lawyer, and my older sister Anya. Anya, when I told her, was silent for a very long time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" "About 6 weeks, I said. Another silence. "And he still doesn't know?" "No, Leela." Her voice was careful, measured, holding enormous emotion at a very deliberate distance. "Are you okay?" "I'm going to be," I said. "That's what I'm working on," she cried. I let her. I held the phone and listened to my sister cry for me. For the version of my life she had also believed in. For the man she had welcomed into our family with open warmth. When she was calmer, she said, "What do you need from me?" "I need you to be ready," I said. "When this is over, when I've done what I need to do, I'm going to need somewhere to land." "You always have somewhere to land," she said immediately. "Always, no matter what," I exhaled. "Thank you," I said, and for the first time in nearly 2 months, something in me softened. Not collapsed, softened. The way a muscle softens after a very long hold. The particular release of knowing you were not entirely alone. By the time I was ready, I had been carrying the secret for 10 weeks. 10 weeks of ordinary mornings and shared dinners and television on the sofa, and entirely convincing performances of a life that had already, in the most essential way, ended. And Ethan, who was smart and perceptive and had never once, in the time I had known him, missed much, suspected nothing. That was the thing I kept returning to, not with satisfaction, exactly, but with a certain quiet understanding of something I perhaps had not fully known about myself before any of this happened. I was capable of extraordinary stillness when I needed to. I was capable of holding an enormous truth completely inside myself, tending it carefully, building around it, and letting nothing show until I was ready. He had thought he was the one with the hidden life. He had no idea what I had been hiding. I chose a Sunday, not for any dramatic reason, not because Sundays had significance in our story, though I suppose everything in our story had been built on Sunday. Mornings, coffee, and silence, and the particular warmth of a life I had believed was real. I chose a Sunday because it was the day Ethan was always most relaxed, most present, most himself, or at least, most the self he performed for me. I wanted him fully awake and completely comfortable. I wanted him to have absolutely no idea what was coming. He came downstairs that morning at around 9. The sun was coming through the kitchen windows, a clear, still morning, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. He was in the comfortable clothes he wore on weekends, hair unbrushed, the easy looseness of a man who feels entirely at home. He made himself coffee. He commented on the weather. He sat down at the kitchen table and picked up his phone with the habitual distraction of a person who reaches for a screen without even deciding to. I sat across from him, I had a folder in front of me, closed. He glanced at it with mild curiosity. "What's that?" "I need to show you some things," I said. My voice was completely steady. This surprised me slightly. Even in the moment I had not been entirely certain that it would be. But it was clear and even and calm. He looked up properly now. Something crossed his face, just a flicker. The faintest first edge of something that was not quite alarm and not quite recognition, just attention. The recalibration of a person who senses, suddenly, that a conversation is different from what they expected. "Okay," he said slowly. I opened the folder. I had organized it carefully, methodically, in the order that told the story most clearly, most undeniably, not to punish him, not to perform anything dramatic, but simply because I had spent 10 weeks building this and I wanted it to be clear. I wanted there to be no room for reframing, for minimizing, for the particular slipperiness of a person who has been lying for a long time and has become very skilled at it. The first thing in the folder was the hotel booking confirmation. The photograph I had taken on my phone, printed cleanly, the date and details clearly visible. I placed it in front of him. I watched his face. I've thought about that moment many times since. The particular quality of it, the way his expression moved through several things very quickly. Confusion first, which was genuine, because he couldn't immediately understand what he was looking at. Then recognition. Then something that was not quite guilt, and not quite fear, but an uncomfortable amalgamation of both. He opened his mouth. "Leela, I'm not finished," I said. I placed the next document in front of him. I showed him everything, not cruelly, not with commentary or emotion or the particular theater of a confrontation. I simply placed each piece of evidence in front of him, one by one, and let him look at it. The bank card statement from the secondary account, the one I shouldn't have been able to find, but had, because when you are quietly paying attention to a person's financial habits for several years, you notice things, the dates and patterns that corresponded with the events I had by now mapped against our shared calendar. The email threads printed from the secondary account, he had not thought to close properly on the laptop. All those weeks ago, his expression changed with each document. The defiance which appeared briefly, instinctively, around the third page, collapsed quickly when he understood the scope of what I was showing him. This was not a woman who had found one thing, and was threatening to find more. This was a woman who had already found everything. By the time I placed the last document on the table, he looked, I want to be precise about this, because I thought about it afterward for a long time. He looked small, not in a satisfying way. Not in a way that gave me any pleasure. He looked like a man who had been caught in a truth about himself that he had perhaps not fully examined, and was now being required to see it clearly for the first time. He looked, I thought, like a man encountering himself. "Layla," he said. His voice was different now, lower, stripped of the ease it had carried 20 minutes ago in this same kitchen. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," I told him. "I haven't asked you here to have a conversation. I've asked you here because I believe you deserve to know that I know. And because there are things I need from you now, practically, legally, and I needed to establish, first, that we are both starting from the same understanding." He stared at me. "You're very calm," he said, and it was not a compliment. It was something closer to bewilderment, unease. "I've had 10 weeks, I said simply. The number landed visibly. I watched him absorb it. 10 weeks, he repeated. 10 weeks. Another silence. How he stopped. Started again. "Why didn't you just confront you immediately?" I said. "Because that would have given you the advantage. You would have managed the narrative. You are very good at managing narratives, Ethan. I've come to understand that more clearly than I ever wanted to." He flinched. "Good. I want to be honest about what happened in the hour that followed. Because this story is not one of those stories where the confrontation is clean and vindicating and the wrongdoer breaks down into perfect accountability and the wronged party walks away, feeling wholly righteous. Real life is messier than that." He apologized. More than once. Genuinely, I think, or as genuinely as a person can apologize when they are also simultaneously trying to understand the extent of their exposure. He tried, at one point, to explain. I let him, because I was curious what version of the story he had constructed for himself. It was, as I expected, a story in which he was not quite the villain of his own telling. A story about being lost and confused and not knowing how to be honest. A story that leaned, carefully, on phrases like "I never meant for it to go so far," and "I know I should have told you and I was a coward." That last part, at least, was accurate. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I understand more than enough. What I'm asking you to do is work with Diane. My lawyer's name is Diane. She'll be in touch this week to process this cleanly and without making it more difficult than it needs to be." He blinked. "You already have a lawyer." "I've had a lawyer for 8 weeks, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "The house," he started, "is something Diane will address with you," I said. "I'm not here to negotiate right now. I'm here to tell you that this is finished, that I know what I know, and that I intend to handle everything that comes next with exactly the composure I've demonstrated in the last 10 weeks. Another long silence. "Leela," he said finally, and his voice was different again. Quieter, stripped entirely of strategy now. Just a man sitting in a kitchen at a table covered in the evidence of his own choices. "I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry." I looked at him. "I know you are," I said. "But you should have been sorry before you started. And you should have been braver before I had to find out for myself." I stood up. I collected the documents from the table, replaced them in the folder, and closed it. "I'm going to my sister's tonight," I said. "I'll be in touch through Diane." And I walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway, past the staircase we had argued pleasantly about repainting, past the coat rack where our jackets still hung side by side, mine, his, the physical residue of a shared life that was now, formally, ending, and I picked up the bag I had packed quietly the night before I opened the front door, walked out into the Sunday morning, and I did not look back. The months that followed were not simple. I will not pretend otherwise. Because this is a true account of what happens when a life comes apart. And true accounts include the parts that are not redemptive or cinematic. The parts that are just hard. The legal process was complicated by the house. Ethan was not obstructive. To his credit, I think the thoroughness of what I had assembled, combined with Diane's precision, made it clear that cooperation was in everyone's best interest. But it was still a process. Still paperwork and phone calls and conversations, conducted through intermediaries about the concrete dismantling of a shared life. There were moments that were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not the big moments, I had prepared for those. But the small ones. The first time I went back to the house to collect belongings and the coat rack in the hallway had only his jacket on it. The moment I realized I could not remember what our kitchen smelled like in the morning anymore. The Sunday when I woke up in Anya's spare room and reached half asleep for a warmth that wasn't there. Grief is not dramatic. That is what no one tells you. It is quiet and patient, and it finds you in the small moments, not the large ones. I cried more in those months than I had during the 10 weeks of knowing. Because during those 10 weeks I had been a woman with a purpose, with a plan, with forward motion, and now the plan was done. And there was nothing left to build toward. And the grief was simply allowed to be what it was. I let it. I did not rush it or manage it or redirect it into something more productive. I let it be present. I let it do what it needed to do. And slowly, not quickly, not dramatically, it began to ease. I heard about Ethan through mutual channels. In the way that information travels, whether you want it to or not. He moved out of the house, which was eventually sold, and the proceeds divided fairly. He moved into a flat on the other side of the city. There was no suggestion of any renewed contact with Kara, whether because she had truly ended things or because Ethan had to. I didn't know and made a deliberate decision not to pursue. He did not reach out to me after the process was complete. I was grateful for that, not because I was angry. The anger, strangely, was one of the first things to dissolve. Once the confrontation had happened and the plan had run its course. Anger is an emotion that requires something to push against. And once there was nothing left to strategize around, nothing left to protect myself from, the anger had nothing left to do. What remained was something quieter. Something I needed to sit with for a while before I understood it. What remained, eventually, was myself. 8 months after I walked out of our front door on a Sunday morning, I had a dinner with Anya and Priya, who had, in the strange way that crises create intimacy, become a genuine friend rather than simply a warm colleague. We were at a small restaurant, the kind with low lighting and good wine, and the unhurried ease of an evening that has nowhere else to be. And at some point in the dinner, Anya said, "Do you feel like yourself again?" I thought about the question properly before answering. Not the polite, reflexive answer, "I'm getting there, I'm fine, I'm moving forward." The real answer? "I feel like more of myself," I said eventually, "than I have in a long time. Maybe more than I ever did, in that version of my life." Anya looked at me carefully. "Because of what he did. Because of what I did," I said. "Because of how I chose to handle it. Because of what I found out I was capable of when it mattered." I paused, reached for my glass. "He thought he was the only one with something hidden," I said. "He never knew that I was hiding something too, this entire time. My awareness, my plan, my strength. He never saw any of it coming." Priya smiled slowly across the table. "And that," she said, "is the most satisfying part." "No," I said. They both looked at me. "The most satisfying part," I said, "is sitting here, 8 months later, without him, and being completely okay." I want to close this story not with a lesson about revenge, because that is not really what this was. Revenge implies wanting the other person to suffer. And I can tell you honestly, with the clarity that only distance and time can give you, that I never wanted Ethan to suffer. I wanted him to know that I knew. I wanted to be the one who controlled the terms of the ending. I wanted to walk out of my own life with my dignity intact, on my own timeline, prepared and clear-eyed rather than blindsided and broken. That is not revenge, that is power. And the distinction matters, because the woman who walked out of that house on a Sunday morning, collected, prepared, fully informed, carrying her own bag and her own plan and her own understanding of what she deserved. That woman was not defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by what she chose to do with it. If you are someone who is in the middle of a difficult truth right now, sitting with something painful, trying to decide what to do, wondering how you will survive the thing you have discovered, I want to say this to you. The greatest advantage you can give yourself is not speed. It is not the immediate, explosive confrontation. It is not the dramatic reveal in front of an audience. The greatest advantage you can give yourself is time. Time to understand what you are dealing with. Time to know your own worth. Time to build something in yourself, for yourself, that cannot be taken from you when the storm finally hits. Be still, be quiet, pay attention, and then, when you are ready, when you have built yourself strong enough to walk through whatever comes, next move. Not with fury, with clarity. Because clarity, in my experience, is the thing that lasts. Fury fades. Pain softens. Stories change in the telling. But the moment you walked out of a door, prepared, on your own terms, knowing exactly who you were and what you deserved, that moment is yours, and no one can ever rewrite it. I still have Sunday mornings, different walls now. A smaller place, for the moment, while I figure out what comes next. And I have come to understand that not knowing what comes next is not the same as being lost. Sometimes it is simply the feeling of a life opening, rather than closing. I still wake up before the alarm sometimes. Still lie there in the quiet. Still listen to the particular silence of a morning before the world begins. It is different now. Less settled, perhaps. Less certain, but it is mine, entirely. Completely, undeniably mine, and that, I have discovered, is worth more than any settled silence built on a foundation. I was never allowed to see. To every woman sitting quietly with a truth she has not yet decided what to do with. You are already stronger than you know. Take your time. Build carefully. And when you're ready, walk, asterisk.